Hello, I'm just quickly filming this before it starts raining. I think that's imminent. I'm here in the rainy season, here in Thailand. For subscribers, I think quite a lot of you saw the post I put up in the community section. I'm here to make the course. I mean, I guess it's not just to make the course, it's also to escape winter in England, or at least some of winter, but also to make the course that I've been saying I'll make since April. I put out a video, I think it was in March that I put a video out asking if people would be interested in a course about recovering from narcissistic abuse, and there was a good response, so I decided to make it, but it's just taken so long to finally put this course together, and I thought, well, it'd be quicker just to go away, and then I'm going to be in a better mindset as well. I'm much more relaxed, and I can think more creatively in a peaceful setting. Anyway, so I'm here to talk today about Prince Andrew. We project a lot onto famous people, you know, we just see them, we don't really know them. We just see a bit of them, and then we sort of make up the rest of the story in our minds. That's natural, it's what we all do. And then it can be really disconcerting when we see this whole other side to them that we didn't know existed. It reminds me a bit of children's TV presenters who it turns out were doing all this coke at the time. And of course, much worse, Jimmy Savile, who used to present Top of the Pops and turned out to be abusing many children. So when this kind of thing happens, when we see this darker side to someone who's famous, it can really be quite shocking, because we've already projected a personality onto somebody, and we expect that the little bit that we see is going to be reflected by the rest of their personality as well, you know, that they're going to, that if they appear to be polite and respectful on TV, on camera, that's probably a reflection of how they actually feel inside. And of course it's not always the case. We only get a little glimpse of someone who's famous, just the part of themselves that they want to present to the public. Epstein started off his career in teaching, but then he moved into banking, and he had this elite social circle, and he would have sex with underage girls. The police first started looking into him because someone complained that he had sexually abused her 14-year-old daughter. And then there were apparently 36 women that police had identified that Epstein had abused. So he went to prison, but that was initially on a plea deal. So he was only convicted of 2 crimes because of this plea deal.
In 2008, he was convicted of soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. He was jailed. This was your friend. How did you feel about it?
Well, I ceased contact with him after I was aware that he was under investigation.
He hasn't answered the question. He was asked about how he felt when he discovered the truth about Epstein. So instead he gives the interviewer what he thinks she wants to hear and what he thinks the public want to hear, and tells them how he distanced himself from Epstein. And I don't think he's aware that he's left a big gap there by not talking about how he felt.
He was released in July. Within months, by December of 2010, you went to stay with him at his New York mansion. Why? Why were you staying with a convicted sex offender?
Right. Now, I went there with the sole purpose of saying to him that because he had been convicted, it was inappropriate for us to be seen together.
So he doesn't say that he didn't want to be in contact with this person, that he found what he'd done to be repulsive, and that he had completely changed his feelings towards him. There's no mention of any of that, and the fact that there isn't, and that his focus is just on how he's seen by other people, suggests that his feelings towards Epstein didn't change.
I'm just trying to work this out, because you said you went to break up the relationship, and yet you stayed at that New York mansion several days. I'm wondering how long.
But I was doing a number of other things while I was there.
But you were staying at the house of
Yes.
a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay.
If he had been horrified by what Epstein had done, then I think whether it was a convenient place to stay or not wouldn't have been relevant. You know, he wouldn't have wanted to stay close to somebody who had done something like that, especially. Or maybe not especially, but I guess, like, as well as the fact that, you know, he had been friends with him. So I think most people, if they were horrified by the actions that Epstein took, I think they would also feel really betrayed that this person who they'd been friends with really wasn't the kind of person they'd thought they were.
He was what I would describe as understanding. He didn't go into any great depth in the conversation about what I was doing or what he was doing, except to say that he'd accepted whatever it was, a plea bargain. He'd served his time, and he was carrying on with his life. You see what I mean? And I said yes, but I'm afraid to say that's as may be. But with all the attendant scrutiny on me, then I don't think it is a wise thing to do.
So it's not that it wasn't kind, it's that it wasn't wise, it wasn't a good idea, it wasn't sensible. Because whoops, look, he's been caught. You know, so again, we don't get a sense of empathy coming from Andrew. You don't get the impression that he would consider the public might feel betrayed, or that people might feel very hurt, people who have been abused by Epstein and their relatives. You know, it's just about whether the public are judging him. So it's about him, it's just about him, and it's not about anybody else. I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do. What Prince Andrew is suggesting is that he shouldn't have been meeting Epstein because he's in the royal family and shouldn't have been seen with him. He's not talking about his own moral values, and he's not suggesting that he shouldn't have been meeting with him because morally that didn't feel like the right thing to do. That there's no mention of that. His values don't come into this, and that suggests to us that his values weren't really at odds with what he was doing. In fact, he says the opposite.
And I took the judgment call that because this was serious, and I felt that doing it over the telephone was the chicken's way of doing it. I had to go and see him and talk to him. But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do.
So if he doesn't show empathy for Epstein's victims, and he doesn't show empathy or understanding of how the public might react, why would he have all of this empathy for Epstein? Why would he be so bothered about how Epstein feels, you know, and want to finish the friendship in the nicest way possible, face to face? I think the reason for this is because he may have been concerned about how Epstein viewed him, rather than about how Epstein felt. You know, what light was he being seen in by Epstein? And there's been speculation in the media that Epstein had something on him, and that Prince Andrew wanted to make sure he didn't feel bitter and tell the public something that would put Prince Andrew in a worse light. So, this is just speculation. We don't know this for a fact, but it would at least make sense as to why it would be that he'd be so concerned about how Epstein saw him. It would also make sense that he'd then risk that they might be seen together in the park, that he'd risk staying over at his place, because all of these things would have meant that the friendship ended in the nicest way possible.
Happened.
So why wouldn't you announce this breakup when you got back? Why wouldn't you publicly explain what you'd done? Did you worry that he had something that could compromise you?
No.
Do you regret that trip?
Yes. And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is.
If you look carefully at Prince Andrew's body language, he seems to go into two different phases. On the one hand, he can come across as the adult who's in control of the situation, who's really confident. He'll sometimes look at his interviewer, he'll look down at her feet and then slowly upwards. He does that at least a couple of times, and that shows that he is feeling that he has authority over her and that he's the one in power.
Well, I ceased contact with him after I was aware that he was under investigation. Now, I went there with the sole purpose of saying to him that because he had been convicted, it was inappropriate for us to be seen together.
And his gestures, they can be a distraction technique. They can make him look like he's very confident about what he's saying. They can distract someone away from looking at his face, and they can make him look like he's really relaxed and in charge.
I've gone through this in my mind so many times.
But then on the other hand, when he is directly accused of something, he tends to adopt a sort of childlike way of being. So he will put his face down and his eyes upwards. And that sort of comes across as innocent and vulnerable.
But that definitely wasn't you getting a foot massage from a Russian girl in Jeffrey Epstein's house.
No.
When Prince Andrew is saying this, he looks very earnest. That's another thing that he repeatedly does, is he widens his eyes to come across as extremely earnest.
Another guest was John Brockman, the literary agent. Now, he described
Really?
seeing you there getting a foot massage from a young Russian woman. Did that happen?
No.
If you look carefully at this clip, you can see how he stammers, how he avoids eye contact, and then at one point he sticks his tongue out just before he says something. And people can do that if they're about to lie or manipulate someone away from the truth.
And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is.
And the reason that we stick our tongues out in a situation like that is because our body is trying to distance us from the lie. You know, our body language can defeat the impression that we're trying to make because we feel uncomfortable when we don't speak the truth. Here again, we can see him gesturing. I think he's over-gesturing. He's lingering on words. He's slowing down his speech. And I think the impression he wants to give is that he's being honest.
But I actually only saw him for about, the dinner party, the walk in the park, and probably passing in the passage.
But when people exaggerate these things, that can be a red flag that actually they're not being honest because they're trying too hard to come across as if they are being honest.
One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts,
Yeah.
has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady.
Virginia Roberts claims that she was flown into London and forced to have sex with Prince Andrew.
I have no recollection of ever meeting her. I'm almost, in fact, I'm convinced that I was never in trance with her. There are a number of things that are wrong with that story.
Miss Roberts has said that she met Prince Andrew in a nightclub and that he was sweating profusely. And Prince Andrew denies this happened. He says that he doesn't remember ever meeting her, and he says that her story can't be true because he can't sweat. He said that in the Falklands War he had an overdose of adrenaline because he was so frightened, and that just stopped him from ever being able to sweat again. And a couple of doctors have gone on TV to say that that's impossible, and that adrenaline and trauma don't stop you from being able to sweat. So who knows if there's any truth in that, but a lot of people think that there isn't.
He took a photo and your arm is round her waist.
I don't remember that photograph ever being taken, but we can't be certain as to whether or not that's my hand on her, whatever it is, left side.
Just to clarify, so you think that photo has been faked?
Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
And you don't recollect having your hand
No.
round her waist
No.
in Ghislaine Maxwell's house on any occasion, even if it was a different date?
I'm terribly sorry, but if I, as a member of the royal family, and I have a photograph taken, and I take very, very few photographs, I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do.
So it seems that he wants to manipulate our opinion of him, but that he also doesn't want to lie on TV. You know, he's probably thinking of his legal position as well. So he's sort of trying to have his cake and eat it, really. He's trying to get us to think that he wasn't in the photo with this girl, that it's been doctored. At the same time, though, he's not actually saying that. He's just saying that he doesn't remember. And who knows if that's true, whether he does remember or whether he doesn't remember. He may well be telling the truth, but then what does that really say? I mean, to me, it suggests that it's not something that shocked him. You know, if he had been in that situation, it's not something that was in his memory afterwards, because it wasn't a shocking thing for him to have done.
And then in 2015, when the allegations were made in the deposition, there was a sort of, this is the immediate family, not the wider family. The wider family couldn't be more supportive. But the immediate family, it was, well, what's all this about?
But he doesn't talk about whether his immediate family were right to judge him. Quite the opposite. In fact, I get the sense that he doesn't think they were, because otherwise he would say something about it. You know, he might say that he'd let his family down, but instead he focuses on how supportive his wider family were, as if that was the right thing for them to have done, that they should have supported him. And this to me suggests an arrogance. It suggests that he doesn't look at himself and his behaviour as being something that he should feel ashamed of. I get the sense throughout this interview that the only thing he thinks that he's done wrong is to accidentally show himself in public with somebody that he shouldn't have done. And that his deeper feelings about somebody who has abused women just don't come into it. He never once mentions them, and I don't think he believes that they're relevant.
Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite.
Unbecoming is a word you might use about somebody who has a skirt on that's a little bit too short, or who picks something up from their plate using their fingers instead of their knife and fork. You know, it's an old-fashioned word that's used to say that somebody is basically not being very classy. You know, they're being that their behaviour is a little bit in bad taste. But it's not a word that works when you're talking about a sex offender, as the interviewer here has said, you know, who has trafficked and raped girls, you know, underage girls. And the fact that he would use the word unbecoming tells us that he thinks that what Epstein has done is minor, it's excusable, it's not a big offence, it's just a bit impolite, a little bit in bad taste, and just not ideal behaviour. And that's the sense we've had really throughout the interview, that the whole way through he's actually made it clear that he doesn't feel horrified or disgusted by this man, and that he thinks his behaviour really isn't that bad. And that tells us about his own inability to empathise with the victims of Epstein.
How do you reconnect with the public then now?
But exactly what I'm doing, which is to use and to continue to work with pitch.
He might have been able to steer the conversation and talk about an issue he really believes in depth, and shown us a caring side of him. But instead he's just talking about himself again, and basically boasting that he's good at working with people, and feeding us this pitch that he's presumably fed to the media before, because it sounds like it's been said over and over again, and it's just this regurgitated line to show us something good about him and about how good he is at working with people.
To continue to work with idea and the things that I believe strongly in. I'm not somebody who does things in competition with people. Oddly, I do things in collaboration with people. So I want people to work together to come to, as it were, a solution to a bigger problem.
Prince William and his wife Kate have shown a lot of interest in mental health. They've already done a lot of good. And in raising awareness, you know, about the importance of mental health, and about speaking about it, about not having this English stiff upper lip that we're known for, you know, but actually talking about these issues. Prince Harry has talked about his own mental health, so again that will have done a lot of good. It's really changing the way that the royal family have come across in the past, where they wouldn't really talk about their feelings, you know, they wouldn't show their vulnerabilities. William and Harry in particular, you know, they lost their mother, of course, and she was very public about her own mental health and how she'd suffered from bulimia, and about her depression. And so And so, you know, it's not for show. That's the impression that I think we're left with, is that they're not talking about these issues for show. It's something that they genuinely believe in, and they're really driven by their values to, to want to actually help people.
The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
You stayed with him.
I stayed with him, and that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family, and we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
What he's really doing here is he's damaging the brand of the royal family so much more by suggesting that it's all about how they look, and that's all that any of the royals would be bothered about, is how they come across, that there's basically nothing genuine about them, and that we shouldn't really trust them because they're just obsessed with image. And he made a mistake because he gave us the wrong image when he walked with Epstein in the park and when he stayed at his place. Instead of him understanding that royals are expected to be moral people who have values and who care about others. People can assume that narcissists always act intentionally, and they often don't, because they lack empathy. They often lack any insight into just how hurtful their behaviour is. They're so obsessed with their own image that they're often not even aware of how they're treating other people. And I think Prince Andrew is a good example of this. I don't know, and I don't really want to say that he's a narcissist because we don't really know enough about him, but he's certainly behaving very narcissistically here. And what he's done here is he's shown us how far from his mind the feelings of the victims of Epstein are, of their families, and really of the public, the general public. You know, how they're going to actually feel about Epstein and about his relationship with Epstein, in terms of feeling betrayed, and confused, and I guess sad, really. All he can see is whether he's going to be judged. So I'm going to leave it here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.
How